Houthis in Yemen launching more ballistic and cruise missiles which are harder to defend against.
The Red Sea lit up like a battlefield as the U.S. Navy delivered a bone-rattling response to the Houthi forces. In a lightning-fast operation, Tomahawk missiles screamed across the desert, obliterating hidden weapons depots in a blaze of fire and destruction. The USS Harry S. Truman and its escorts sent a clear message. Don't touch American ships. Drones, missiles, and bunkers were annihilated in coordinated strikes, leaving nothing but smoke and ash. The Houthis picked a fight and paid a heavy price. The Red Sea is sometimes called a stretch of deep blue water, resting near the deserts of Yemen and across from the shores of East Africa. It looks peaceful on a map, but it holds a position of immense weight for global commerce. Year after year, a massive chunk of the world's oil, gas, and daily goods, often said to be around 15% of global trade, glides through its waters in container ships and bulky tankers. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a tight funnel at the southern entrance, is the only way in or out for these vessels. Day and night, large ships pass in single-file lines, hoping to avoid collisions or any trouble that lurks nearby. At the start of 2025, however, the real threat was no longer something brushed aside. Thick columns of black smoke occasionally rose from Yemen's coast, carrying the distinct smell of burning metal and explosives. The key players in this unfolding drama were the Houthi forces, also spelled Houthis, who had seized control in parts of Yemen's west. Backed by powerful friends in Iran, these desert fighters decided not just to hit local rivals, but to challenge international shipping lanes and even the mighty U.S. Navy. Observers everywhere wondered how a group with less money and simpler weapons could threaten warships worth billions of dollars. For the Houthis, it was never about matching the big ships with fancy gear. They banked on cheap, relentless attacks using drones and older missiles. Early one evening, around 5:40 p.m., the entire region took a nervous breath. The behemoth known as the USS Harry S. Truman, a massive American aircraft carrier carrying over 5,000 sailors and dozens of combat jets, was plying these waters. It was not alone. Destroyers like the USS Gravely and other escorts formed a ring around it, scanning in all directions. Suddenly, one of the escorting ships picked up suspicious contacts on the radar. In a matter of seconds, a stern voice called out, "Confirmed threat inbound!" Alarms blared, and sailors raced to their stations. The confrontation that followed would become a prime example of this new brand of warfare. The Houthis were firing anti-ship missiles, like the C-802, and sending swarms of Shahed-type drones from hidden launch pads on Yemen's sandy coast. C-802 missiles, often called wave-skimming killers, zoom right above the ocean's surface at speeds of around 620 miles per hour. Their small radar signature makes them almost ghostly, especially during dusk or dawn. Carrying warheads that weigh hundreds of pounds, they can tear open a large ship if allowed to strike. Then there is the second wave, slow-moving drones known as kamikaze models, each carrying a modest amount of explosives. One or two drones on their own might seem unimpressive, but the Houthis use them in clusters, a swarm that forces defenders to choose whether they want to waste costly interceptors or try knocking them down with close-range cannons. That evening, the USS Gravely had to make a snap decision. The big threats, the anti-ship missiles, were targeted first with SM-2 interceptors. Each SM-2 soared out of the vertical launch cells in a plume of smoke, costing a hefty sum, around $2 million apiece. The radar screens showed flashing hits, confirming both inbound missiles had been destroyed before they could get close to the carrier group. Some whooped in relief, but the next wave soon appeared. A cluster of drones lumbering forward at about 115 miles per hour, not nearly as fast as a missile, but able to slip in at low altitude. The Gravely's captain was quick to respond. "Don't waste any more big missiles on these drones." Instead, the CIWS, a Gatling gun system commonly called R2D2 for its dome shape, unleashed a roaring blast of 20-millimeter shells. In seconds, each drone was peppered by thousands of rounds. Fragments tumbled into the sea, leaving only ripples behind. Yet the interception, though successful, felt bittersweet. Two advanced SM-2 interceptors, each costing millions, had been spent on cheap C-802 missiles worth only a fraction of that amount. The drones were dirt cheap in comparison. Some sailors grumbled about using a sledgehammer to crush a fly, but they also knew that letting an unsophisticated missile or drone slip through could be catastrophic, especially if it slammed into the hull of a carrier. The Houthis must have been aware of this. By repeatedly launching low-cost weapons, they forced the Americans to use up expensive interceptors and maintain constant vigilance. Even if these attacks rarely succeeded in hitting, they served Iran's interest in draining resources, testing tactics, and reminding the world that the Red Sea was no safe place. In truth, the Houthis had an entire arsenal that went beyond basic cruise missiles and drones. They also possessed, through Iranian support, ballistic missiles remade from old Soviet models or Iranian-engineered designs. Some ballistic missiles could travel dozens or even hundreds of miles with varying degrees of accuracy. If the Houthis launched them at a U.S. ship, that ship often had no choice but to prepare intercepts worth millions of dollars. This mismatch was enough to earn the label of asymmetric warfare, where a smaller force uses cheaper gear and repeated blows to sap the bigger adversary's strength. On that same day, people on the deck of the USS Harry S. Truman gazed toward the Yemeni shore as the sun set. They saw the black smoke rising from the rocket motors fired earlier. They knew those missiles had aimed for them. It didn't matter that the carrier was basically a floating fortress. The Houthis' objective did not seem to be sinking a carrier outright. If they scored even a single successful strike, headlines around the globe would mark it as a major humiliation for the U.S. Navy. The fear of that scenario was enough to keep everyone awake. 48 hours later, the Navy delivered its response. Overhead, satellites from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency scoured hidden corners of the Yemeni desert. Drone flights from MQ-9 Reapers and signal snooping by an RC-135 rivet joint pieced together evidence of a Houthi weapon stockpile. Suspecting that those bunkers there held the ballistic and cruise missiles recently fired, two U.S. destroyers, the USS Gravely and the USS Carney, launched Tomahawks stealthily at around 2:05 a.m. Each Tomahawk roared across barren plains, hugging the ground to avoid detection. Not long after, a wave of FA-18s took off from the carrier, dropping JDAM bombs in the same zone. Flames illuminated the dark sky, marking the moment those bunkers erupted. It was a statement that the U.S. would not just defend, it would strike back. Some might assume that such punishment would silence the Houthis. But those who operated out in the Red Sea learned otherwise. Within weeks, small clusters of drones or ballistic missiles were detected once again. New shipments trickled in, reportedly from Iranian sources. Analysts concluded that Iran found it quite useful to cause trouble for the U.S. Navy without direct confrontation. With each exchange, Iranian planners might collect data on how the Americans used their interceptors, radar systems, and electronic jammers. In the midst of all this, reporters noted the ballooning cost for the U.S. in defending these waters. A single SM-6 interceptor soared past $4 million. SM-2 and SM-3 missiles also cost in the millions. Even if they tried using the cheaper Hellfire or Sidewinder missiles, hundreds of thousands of dollars each, the price remained steep compared to a drone that might cost maybe $20,000. A young sailor might have asked, "How long can we keep doing this?" The U.S. Navy also turned to electronic warfare. Ships like the USS Mason, outfitted with the AN/SLQ-32 suite, sometimes nicknamed Slick 32, attempted to jam or scramble incoming missiles before they required a high-cost interceptor. It worked often enough, drawing praise from top brass, who recognized those systems as a huge money saver. The same principle went for ballistic missiles. If their guidance could be confused, maybe they would miss the target. But this did not mean the threat was neutralized. Some older ballistic missiles traveled too quickly and in a ballistic arc that might not rely on external guidance signals. Thus, when the Houthis launched something bigger, the U.S. had to rely on standard missiles to knock it out. Operation Prosperity Guardian, the official name for the U.S. and Allied presence in the Red Sea, remained in full force. Warships from several countries rotated through the region, sometimes overshadowed by the enormous presence of an American carrier strike group. Allies recognized how the Houthis might try to attack not only military vessels, but also commercial shipping or large oil tankers. One of the biggest concerns was that any catastrophic hit on a tanker would cause global oil prices to skyrocket, not to mention pollute the sea with huge amounts of crude. Sailors on these ships described a sense of constant alertness. The daily routine involved scanning horizons, performing helicopter overflights, searching for suspicious boats that might carry missile parts, and practicing with deck cannons to hone skills for shooting down drones at short range. The entire theater felt alive with tension, yet the Houthis pressed onward, forging new ballistic or cruise missiles out of old stock, with Iranian know-how in the background. Meanwhile, in other corners of the world, rumors flourished about the U.S. developing aircraft so advanced they might disrupt the entire concept of warfare. Some spoke about planes that mastered stealth to a degree beyond the B-2 Spirit bomber's famed abilities. Others believed the U.S. was quietly testing anti-gravity technology in a place known as the Antelope Valley in California, or near the infamous Area 51. They cited the codename TR-3A Black Manta for a supersonic reconnaissance jet with a triangular shape, or the even more sensational TR-3B, rumored to feature an anti-gravity engine, possibly reverse-engineered from unknown craft. Tales described how it could hover silently and travel at speeds unmatched by normal jets. Skeptics in the defense community usually rolled their eyes at such claims, saying that while advanced programs existed, like the F-117 or the B-2 in older times, anti-gravity was pushing the bounds of known physics. They pointed to the fact that stealth technology itself took years to develop, forcing engineers to use special shapes, coatings, and angles to deflect radar waves. The real leaps, though impressive, had rarely defied basic laws of motion. Still, the stories lingered, stoked by patents filed for gravity wave generators and references to secret black budget projects with billions of federal dollars unaccounted for. The parallel chatter in the aviation world soared. The same day that the Red Sea was seeing a new round of Houthi missiles, folks in California talked about strange triangular craft spotted in the night sky. Historically, the U.S. had proven adept at hiding advanced developments. One famous example was the F-117 Nighthawk, which was tested in secret at night in remote areas, triggering UFO reports before its public unveiling. Another was the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, designed under a hush-hush program that cost tens of billions. That bomber used a flying wing layout, no tail, and special materials that let it slip under the radar. Maintaining each B-2 was also breathtakingly expensive. Annual maintenance for a small fleet was in the hundreds of millions. One reason for building these planes was to ensure the U.S. could enter heavily defended airspace. But the B-2 seldom, if ever, got used for small-scale conflicts like chasing swarms of cheap drones. The contrast could not have been starker. On one hand, the U.S. was rumored to be testing top-secret jets with potential anti-gravity propulsion in the southwestern deserts. On the other, it was burning millions of dollars daily to shoot down modest missiles launched by desert fighters. Even the widely discussed Next Generation Air Dominance (NGAD) program in the Air Force, aiming for a sixth-generation fighter, was overshadowed by the need to keep shipping lanes open in the Red Sea. The U.S. was forced to plan for future wars against near-peer adversaries, all while grappling with daily skirmishes that demanded immediate solutions. Iran, as the behind-the-scenes player, was pleased to keep American ships busy. The Houthis, after all, tested out ballistic missiles or drones that might feed valuable insights back to Tehran. Sometimes intelligence reports mentioned that Iranian specialists advised Houthi crews on how to optimize launch angles or flight profiles. Various ballistic weapons, such as the repurposed Soviet SA-2 or locally produced variants of Iranian missiles, were carted in segments across hidden trails. Then they were fired at shipping or at random times of day, prompting a flurry of defensive reactions from U.S. vessels. Every interception might be a success for the Americans in immediate terms, but cost them equipment and readiness in the long run. Sometime in January 2024, there was a now famous day when the USS Leon, another Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, faced a barrage all at once. 18 drones, 2 anti-ship missiles, plus a ballistic missile. The Leon's crew scrambled, launching interceptors for the bigger threats while trusting its jammers and close-in cannons to handle the rest. They barely had time to breathe before everything was neutralized. On paper, it looked like a perfect defense, but behind the scenes, thousands of rounds of ammunition had been used, and a handful of surface-to-air missiles had soared away at enormous cost. This quick escalation forced the Americans to reevaluate. Many argued for more frequent use of a ship's 5-inch deck gun or for specialized jamming that let drones simply drop from the sky, preserving the expensive interceptors for ballistic missiles. Yet Houthis kept adapting too. They might send drones at multiple altitudes or combine them with ballistic threats that soared high enough to demand top-tier SM-3 or SM-6 interceptors. In a parallel thread, one could read about the Hush Hush Aurora project, alleged to be a supersonic spy plane that replaced the SR-71 Blackbird, but never officially confirmed. Another rumor pointed to the shady Project Paperclip after World War II, where German scientists apparently helped the US develop advanced rocket technology. Some gossip extended that narrative, saying old Nazi research on advanced propulsion was the seed of these rumored anti-gravity planes. Websites full of speculation claim the triangular TR-3B used nuclear-powered swirling mercury to reduce gravity. Others insisted it was just an advanced stealth drone with a triangular shape. Either way, the open seas around Yemen saw no evidence of those shapes. Instead, proven platforms like the EER-18G Growler, a specialized electronic warfare jet, sometimes patrolled above carriers to jam inbound threats. Growlers used pods to disrupt everything from remote detonation signals to radar tracking. None of that prevented the day-to-day costs from rising for the Navy. Officials pointed to Operation Desert Storm in the early 1990s, saying the number of air defense missiles now fired in just a year of the Red Sea Watch period was surpassing the entire Desert Storm campaign. That was because Desert Storm was a short war with set objectives, while the Red Sea became a drawn-out front. The paint on some warship missile hatches was said to have been scorched off from repeated launches. Morale was affected by the repetitive nature of these interceptions. Analysts forecasted that the Houthis would only become more emboldened by any publicity, while Iran quietly took notes. Allied warships sometimes joined the fray, adding to the protective screen around vital shipping. The French, British, and others had their own regrets about how quickly a few cheap rockets could upset global trade. Insurance rates on shipping skyrocketed when rumors of fresh Houthi attacks spread. These battered desert fighters and their improvised arsenals occasionally shot at ships from other nations too, though the US remained their prime trophy target, presumably for propaganda impact. Later in 2024, the Navy tried to incorporate cheaper interception solutions more aggressively, like the rolling airframe missile for closer threats or Hellfire missiles launched from deck-based systems. Some ships also tested smaller, more agile interceptors for drones. The Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, in Silicon Valley put out calls to private firms for a new kinetic defeat mechanism that could be made in less than a year. They wanted something that wouldn't cost a fortune each time it was fired. They ruled out lasers for now, possibly due to the complex power demands and saltwater air that could hamper beam strength. That urgent plea hinted at the deeper vulnerability. In 2025, the US was still stuck using systems that might bankrupt them if the Houthis stepped up their game. A few months into 2025, the Houthis boasted online that they had bombarded the USS Harry S. Truman for 7 hours straight with a mixture of ballistic missiles and drones. Official US sources described it differently. Yes, multiple inbound weapons had been picked up on radar over several hours, suffering near total interception. The carriers themselves clearly remained afloat and fully functional. But in the eyes of those scanning social media, the Houthis' claim might sound like a grand victory. This layering of truth and propaganda was part of the conflict. The big question was how long it might continue. The Red Sea was too crucial to ignore, so the U.S. Navy had to keep a robust presence. At the same time, some watchers saw it as a forever game. The Houthis fired, the Americans defended, and trade kept flowing at a high security cost. In the background, stealth bombers like the B-2 Spirit carried on with their post-Cold War tasks, including strategic missions that soared from the U.S. heartland to distant corners of the map. The cost of each flight was staggering, with specialized hangars needed to keep the bomber's stealth coating in top shape. Over time, the B-2 was upgraded with better electronics, an open mission systems architecture, and advanced radars that let it detect threats earlier. But none of that directly solved the cheap drone wave in the Red Sea, which was akin to fighting off a swarm of mosquitoes with a golden hammer. Other programs, like the so-called B-21 Raider, were in the works as a next step in stealth bombing. The future of the U.S. Air Force also hinged on next-generation air dominance, NGAD, which envisions sixth-generation fighters paired with unmanned drone teams. This might theoretically provide better coverage over maritime zones. Some folks pointed all the way to the rumored TR-3B or TR-3A, linking it with an anti-gravity drive that might let it hover or zip around at insane speeds. They claim such a craft could single-handedly jam Houthi radars and knock out drones without expending million-dollar missiles. Others argued that even if such a marvel existed, it would likely be kept for potential showdowns with major state adversaries, not a cat-and-mouse struggle with a local group in Yemen. After all, the F-117 stealth jet and the B-2 bomber were also kept secret for years before being unveiled. If a genuine anti-gravity craft existed, it was likely considered too big a secret to risk exposing in a low-level conflict. The public also read about the historical path behind stealth technology. Lockheed's Skunk Works developed the F-117 from the Have Blue prototypes, shaping angled surfaces to deflect radar waves. Northrop Grumman pitched in with the B-2 and tested other stealth designs like Tacit Blue. Boeing quietly built the Bird of Prey, a test bed for advanced shapes. Each of these projects had ties to hush-hush government budgets, though eventually they were, to some extent, revealed. But the rumored Aurora or TR-3B programs never had that official reveal, leaving them in the realm of speculation, wild eyewitness accounts, and half-baked photos. Some mention German scientists brought to America under Project Paperclip after World War II, claiming certain rocket experiments formed the backbone of anti-gravity research. Others laugh that off, saying those scientists simply helped jumpstart NASA's conventional rocket designs. Regardless, none of it changed the day-to-day balance of power near Yemen's coast, where ballistic missiles and drones hogged the headlines. In January 2024, the Houthis fired a ballistic missile that soared high before descending on an American ship's radar coverage zone. The U.S. had to respond with an SM-6 or SM-3 at a monstrous cost. That is exactly the kind of economic warfare strategy that smaller forces love to exploit. The group behind it, possibly directed from Tehran, could keep doing so. Meanwhile, in the southwestern U.S., if some triangular shape soared overhead, that story stayed in the rumor mill. The Houthis regularly rummaged for fresh ways to catch the Americans off guard. They adapted ballistic missiles by removing their old Soviet guidance units, swapping in something a bit more modern, or adjusting warheads for maximum effect. Each time they fired these, either they scored a propaganda point or forced an interceptor launch that was prohibitively expensive. The Americans responded in waves, sometimes flattening a suspected Houthi depot with a barrage of Tomahawks or F-18 bomb runs. Overnight, large bunkers erupted in flames, sending secondary explosions skyward as stored rockets blew up. But a month later, more always seemed to appear. Deeper in Yemen, smugglers found ways to bring in additional parts, all under Iranian guidance. That cycle repeated enough times to feel endless. U.S. officers sometimes described the Red Sea environment as the busiest maritime front since World War II, especially in terms of air defense intercepts. They made comparisons to previous decades, observing that no other place had triggered so many missile launches in such a tight time span. A frustrated radio operator might wonder, we used to prepare for big state-on-state wars, But now we spend entire months chasing drones and older missiles. The entire region pulsed with tension, especially around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where cargo ships lined up. Everyone was aware that a single successful strike on a tanker could create a dramatic global ripple. Another dimension of the conversation was the possibility that Russia or China was gleaning lessons from seeing how the US responded to nonstop cheap attacks. They might replicate the swarming approach with more advanced gear in a future conflict. So the Red Sea effectively became not just an American Houthi battle, but a laboratory for modern warfare tactics, fueling speculation about what technology was next. If advanced stealth alone wasn't enough to stop cheap drones, then how about an actual anti-gravity craft that could vanish from radar and swat away threats at near zero cost? People indulged in these futuristic ideas, while real sailors on real ships stuck to searching the horizon with binoculars and radar tracks each day. Near the end of 2024, the US was forced to consider whether it had enough intercept missiles on hand to repel a truly massive surge. Resupply ships had to bring fresh stocks of SM series missiles, Sidewinders, Hellfires, and even standard 5-inch ammunition. This high usage rate was never intended as the normal day-to-day setting for a modern Navy. Allies pitched in with intelligence assistance, while the Defense Innovation Unit hammered away at a cheaper solution. They wanted a cost-effective kinetic measure that might use simpler projectiles or a specialized drone that collided with incoming threats. The repeated disclaimers about not seeking laser solutions at this time revealed that the US recognized lasers were not yet robust enough to handle large swarms in the salty, humid environment of the sea. By early 2025, some estimates claimed the US had shot down nearly 500 Houthi drones and spent hundreds of interceptors in total. Officials insisted that these attacks had not managed to sink or heavily damage any major American vessel. But the psychological weight on the crews was significant. People shared stories of paint burned off vertical launch system doors, as well as frantic mid-watch alarms that had them running to battle stations at all hours. The ongoing threat from ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones meant the cost continued to climb. Thanks for watching another episode. While you are still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more quality content.